The first step in the process for us to make this portfolio website is going to be to plan it according to what we've got planned out in the sitemap here. So what our sitemap is telling us is that there should be a top navigation bar that contains the primary navigation. All of these would probably be internal pages, internal links, but it's not out of the realm of possibility that you might have an external link in the primary navigation of a site. It's just not quite as usual. Anyway, though, so what we're going to build is a template that has a navigation bar that includes these 5 pages. And then for the secondary navigation, we're going to build those into what's called a footer. So it would be links that are along the bottom of the page that we'll use to get to these. And we are going to follow the instructions that are given to us here to format our template. Now, it looks like a lot, but we can actually finish this very quickly. It doesn't take very long to do. And then we'll talk about how to validate code once we're done with that. So we are going to dive right into part 2 here and apply what we've learned about HTML. Again, I'm going to have this off on another screen that's not being recorded, but you can follow along with this as you need to. So I'm going to move it over here. And our first assignment here, or first step in the instructions, every HTML page needs a doc type. So we're working on template.html, which has been saved in our portfolio site folder, which we're calling GRD 188 for this class. And we're going to start with a doc type. So a doc type looks like this. You just type the word doc type and then HTML. And I think it starts with an exclamation point. Yes. So this is what our doc type should look like. And what this means is that this code is going to be HTML5 specifically. This is the HTML5 doc type. Now, you don't have to memorize all of these things. So if you're not sure what the HTML doc type should be, you can actually Google doc type HTML. And one of the best resources to learn or to get your code from is W3 Schools. They're considered somewhat of an authority on writing HTML. They've got a lot of good tutorials too. But if you're just not sure, you can always Google it and check it. And we can see here that this is correct. Doc type HTML with an exclamation point in front. And we can also see some of the other things on this example that they're giving us. But we're going to write those ourselves. So we're going to move back over here. Every page needs the HTML doc type. If you see a doc type that looks different from this, it's a different version of HTML. HTML5 is the most recent version, but HTML is sort of like a dictionary because it's a language. And so just like dictionaries have different editions or different versions, where they add words to the dictionary or they remove words from the dictionary or they update the definitions, HTML is the same way. It evolves over time. So if you see a different looking doc type, that means it's a different version of HTML. But the most common one you're going to see these days is this HTML5 one. Okay, so the next thing that we need on every single HTML page is that all of our code needs to be included inside of an HTML element. So I'm going to type an opening HTML tag, and then I'm going to type a closing HTML tag. So an element is the opening tag and the closing tag and everything in between. Tags are just pieces of code that note the beginning and end of an element. So in this case, we start with an HTML element. We make sure we close it at the same level of indentation. And then I need to add HTML's children. So HTML has 2 children. I'm going to tab in one to make sure that I can see that parent-child relationship. And I'm going to open and close a head element. And then I'm also going to, while I'm at it, open and close a body element. Body is the only sibling of head in HTML. So there should never be any code between the opening HTML tag and the opening head tag. And there should never be any code between the closing head tag and the opening body tag. Likewise, there should never be any code between the closing body tag and the closing HTML tag. All of those have a parent-child relationship, and there are no other relatives at that level of this hierarchy. However, our head tag does need to have a couple of children. So I'm going to tab in to where I'm inside of the head element. And the first thing that my instructions call for are a character set meta tag. Now, we probably didn't learn a lot about meta tags in the tutorials, but basically everything that goes in the head element of a page, it doesn't appear on the page, but it describes the stuff that does appear on the page. And this particular tag just lets the browser know when we're using special characters, what character set to take that from. So I'm going to add a tag called meta with the attribute of char set. And you notice in Sublime it starts to hint them to me, so I don't have to memorize them all. And in this case it's showing me char set. The value for this needs to be UTF-8. And meta tags are special in that there are very few tags in HTML that don't need a closing tag. And in this case, the meta element is one of them. This is called a self-closing element. And so you don't have to type the closing tag for it. Most of them need it. Meta elements don't. Image elements don't. And there might be a couple of others that I'm forgetting, I think, within forms. But for the most part, all others do. We'll talk about them as we go. Now, I realize I'm missing something in my HTML element as well. So my HTML element needs an attribute that lets the browser know what language all the content's written in. So that attribute is a lang attribute. You hit equals, quotes, and I'm going to type EN for English so that the browser knows that I'm writing this content in English. We've got enough code on the page here now that we can talk a little bit about the syntax of HTML and what all the different parts are. So the parts here that are being highlighted in red for me are the element names or the tags. So HTML is an element, head is an element, body is an element. When we see code in purple here, with exception to doctype really, doctype's a little bit different. It looks like it's recursive, so ignore doctype, but when we start talking about everything else, this will apply. So in this case, the text in purple is called an attribute. So it's an attribute of the HTML. So it's a feature of the HTML, right? And then the equals and the quotes are part of that attribute. The stuff that goes in between the quotes are referred to as a value. So this is the value of the language attribute, meaning language equals English. So it's a little bit backwards, but basically this is saying that we're writing HTML and all of the content is written in English. The same thing's happening here with our meta char set, or our char set meta, excuse me. So meta is data about data. It's just saying that this is some important information about the page, and that the character set that will be used for special characters that HTML doesn't provide is going to be UTF-8. We don't need to go too far down the rabbit hole with this. For now, this is a little bit more complicated than we need to get, as long as you are able to use it. So we'll cross this bridge when we come to it. There's very few cases where we need UTF-8, but you still want to have it in there just in case. Okay, the next thing that we need is another meta element, and this one is going to describe the page. So I'm going to write meta as my tag or my element, and then I'm going to give this meta a name equal to description. And so this is important. This is a named meta, so you want to make sure that you always use the name equals description for this, or the browser won't know what it is, but there are a lot of named metas. So this is going to be consistent. This is included in the HTML dictionary, if you will. But then we can make the content unique. So in this case, we need to have content in this meta attribute, and we need for this to describe the page. For now, since this is a template, we're just going to put some content in here that reminds us to update this. So what we're going to type in here is something to this effect. It doesn't need to be exactly what I'm writing, but something along these lines of, let's see, describe the page here using a complete sentence of around 155 characters. And put a period here and then write, remember that this appears in search engine results, so make it good. Okay, we'll talk about that a little bit later too, but for now, just this placeholder content will do. The last thing that I need to do for my meta element here is make sure that I close it. This little closing greater than symbol is really important, otherwise it starts to break my code. And you can see how this is highlighted in red. A lot of times when you see an error in HTML, it's not the thing that's highlighted, but something just before it. And in this case, I'm just missing that closing symbol there. So now that that's closed, the last thing that I need in my head element is a title element. And a title is kind of a special type of meta. It has its own name, as a matter of fact. It's so important. So I'm going to write title. And title is not self-closing. So I'm going to make sure that every time I open a tag that is not self-closing, I'm going to type the closing tag right away just so I don't forget. And I'm always going to put it on the same column as far as my left-hand indentation. And then I'm going to try to always remember to put my content inside of that. So here, for the title is also pretty important. It also shows up in search engine results. So I'm going to write each page needs a unique title that tells search engines what the page is about. Make sure to update this for every page. Okay, so for now, our head element is complete. We'll do another video where we go over the body element in full because there's a lot more that goes into the body element. For now, let's save it and let's take a look at our template in the browser. So I'm going to save and then I'm going to open in browser. And what we're going to see is not much because, again, everything that goes in the head element doesn't appear on the page. The only thing that you kind of see on the page is that title. So this is one place where the title appears. But everything else in the head, it's there. If we view page source, you can see that it's there. It just doesn't show on the page because everything in the head just describes the page. And everything on the body element or within the body element shows you the content. So with that being said, you might be wondering, well, why do I even need this if it doesn't show up on the page? Well, let me show you really quickly an example. So I am going to do a quick Google search here for, I don't know, I need a website, right? And this is called the SERPs, the Search Engine Results page. And this is pretty common. You'll hear people talking about this, especially in search marketing. And all of the first results here are sponsored. That means somebody's paid to appear in these results. Now, we've all seen this because we've all gone to Google and typed something in when we needed something. Well, if we scroll down far enough, we no longer see the sponsored results, and that lets us know that these are what are called organic results, which means that these are showing up based on their own merit, based on how well they described their website. So why am I showing you all of this? Well, I want you to understand where the title attribute and the description attribute do show, since they don't show on our page. If I take, for example, this Web Designer Express site, let me come back here. I open that in its own tab. And I'm actually going to view its page source. Now we're going to see a lot of code here. Don't worry about that. But the thing I want you to notice is, for instance, the title right here. You see this title element and how the text says, I need a website. Need website for my small business. So this is where the title shows up. This is why we want to make our page titles good, because if we happen to show up in search results, we want to make sure that the title and the description, which is what's right here, are worded in such a way that somebody chooses our page or our website over all the others that they have to choose from. So you want to keep that in mind. Both our title and our description are right here. So this is the title, and this is the description meta in most cases. Sometimes not, but we'll get into that further down the road as well. So in the absence of other code, anyway, for the most basic of websites, which is what we're building, the title would appear in the search engine results right here, and the description would be what shows up right here. So you do want to make sure that it doesn't say something like replace this code or change me or any other kind of boilerplate code. So anyway, go ahead and get this far, and then in the next video we will talk about what all needs to go in the body element so that we actually have something to see on the page.